Well, welcome to our second video on John Gottman's The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. We left off last time getting ready to talk about Dr. Gottman's 6 predictors of divorce.
Yep.
And he has these 6 signs he came up with just through watching couples interact with each other. He'll have them converse, he'll have them even bring up a little bit of conflict.
Yeah, back to the love lab.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
at the Love Lab. And he's come up with these 6 signs that, basically like if a couple of these are showing, man, I'm going to say they're going to get divorced if they don't start working
on these.
Yep.
And I think that that's the part that we want to start with here, is that some of these may come up for you. Most of these came up for us. And this isn't saying because you have these, you're going to get divorced, or that you should get divorced. What this means is that it's time to bring awareness to some of these behaviors and some of these things that are going on in your relationship and working through them. Say, hey, you know what, one of us does this or we both do that. Let's tackle this and get through why we do it and change the behavior.
Right, and when we almost got divorced, we had most of these, really,
Yeah, yes, we did.
Going
I think
through
we had
this-
all of them but one.
Right.
We just had a whole conversation on
But going through this section was very much like of an aha, like, oh yeah, we did that, oh yeah, we did that, and we had that, so.
Right, or at the time it was, we do that, because back then we were still in that space of,
Right.
Right.
So-
Okay, so number 1.
Yeah, the first sign he calls the harsh startup. So if he sees immediately upon the couple conversing, if there's a harsh startup, especially related to conflict that includes sarcasm or some sort of criticism, he knows that there's an issue. It's his first sign. Something like if you're talking about doing housework and one of the couples says, or lack thereof, it's a sarcasm that comes from a darker place. It's not trying to poke fun or be sweet. It's really nasty in tone.
Right. And I will say that the sarcasm thing is a kind of a touchy subject that comes up for me because we have a ton of sarcasm in our relationship. There's times I call you a loser, right? I'm like, you're being such a loser right now. But it comes from a place of endearment and I love you. And I think about like Whit and Joe. Whit and Joe are a perfect example of this. Like, they poke fun at each other all the time, but they have one of the deepest friendships of any couple I've ever met, right?
Just so for our audience,
that's my
sister and brother-in-law.
Yeah,
Whit and
right.
Joe. Yep.
So anyway, like, this doesn't mean don't have sarcasm in your relationship.
Right.
I think that's kind of a...
It's a sign. It's a sign of a dark sarcasm when you start a conversation.
Negative sarcasm.
The harsh startup.
Yes, right.
Then he goes into the second sign, which is actually 4 smaller signs, but the second sign he calls the 4 horsemen. And they could go into this order, but, they kind of feed off of each other. And the first horseman he calls is criticism. And he does a great way of laying out the difference between a complaint versus criticism. A complaint is, let's say you have an agreement that somebody is going to do the dishes. We're going to use house chores probably a lot in these examples, where a complaint is, hey, you said you were going to do the dishes, and I feel like I was ignored because you didn't do the dishes. When are you going to do them?
Yeah.
Whereas a criticism would be something like, gosh, you said you were going to do the dishes and you never follow through with anything you say you're going to do. What's wrong with you?
Right.
That's criticism.
I'm going to read the example out of the book. A complaint, there's no gas in the car, and I'm upset that you didn't fill it up like you said you would. Can you please deal with it tomorrow? Same as what you just said. Criticism, why can't you ever remember anything? I told you 1,000 times to fill up the tank and you didn't. You're always so careless. Which that brings me up the feeling that this is something I still need to work on with the kids.
We saw a lot of like, oh man, we do this with the kids,
Honestly, I mean, that's just a side note. I'm going to derail for just a second. I have this second round, because we are in such a lovely place in our relationship, I'm focusing this study on the kids and how I parent.
Because a lot of, all those are 7 principles for making marriage work. It's 7 principles for making relationships thrive.
Yeah, this is just relationships.
Right.
Because, well
let's get back to marriage,
yeah.
So the second horseman is contempt. So a lot of criticism can then lead to what he calls contempt, which is when there's a superiority complex where one person in the relationship is really quite disgusted with the other. And
Which this was me.
Right. So there's constant criticism. There isn't even just these specific examples. It's just you're just disgusted with the other person and you feel above them and you're constantly writing them or whatever else. So
I felt that I not only was a constant nag, but at the root of it, I remember distinctively sitting like across the table from you at dinner or next to you on the couch. I couldn't even handle the way you breathed. Bad, right? This is horrible. And so when we went through this, I remember feeling like, is there any hope if you get to that point that you can't even stand the way, or chewing? So bad. And now, to know how far we've come and the fact that I find your little weird things endearing, how the heck does that happen?
Right.
Yeah, from doing the work.
So getting back to contempt, too much contempt and criticism then in the other part lead to defensiveness.
Right.
Defensiveness being the third horseman. Yeah, I was incredibly defensive, where you're constantly coming up with excuses or reasons why things are happening the way they're happening.
Or flip the blame. Well, you did this.
Right, it becomes even a passive-aggressive sort of behavior, and that lack of growth, even further disgusts or creates contempt in the other partner. So defensiveness can often then lead to, and the criticism, to stonewalling. Stonewalling is where one of the partners feels so just overwhelmed.
This is number 4 of the horsemen.
Right, the fourth horseman is just, you're shut down. You're not even engaging in anything any longer, and you're basically shutting yourself off.
Which was a very common pattern for us. I would get into that, contempt and superiority. This is our bunny, by the way, losing her mind, trying to get out. We'll just pause. We're going to pause for a second, tell the bunny to stop. We'll post a picture of the bunny below. Okay, here she comes.
All right.
Deb, her name's Deb. Maybe we'll just keep this rolling.
Maybe we will. All right.
So, what would happen for us is I would be in that superiority contempt place because I was in it for so long, and it would overwhelm you and you would shut down, and I'd be like, but we need to talk about this, and you were so overwhelmed with sensory overload from my craziness that we would never circle back, because you would basically say to me, I don't even know where to start. What's the first problem that you'd like to address? Because you basically just spent the last 30 minutes telling me how horrible I was.
Right. And what leads to a lot of the stonewalling, which is the fourth horseman of the second sign, because it gets a little confusing.
It is a little confusing.
In the third sign, he calls flooding.
Yeah.
Right. So when he's observing these couples communicate with each other, the flooding being that one is just constantly writing and at the other, that the other feels overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's what I guess I was explaining flooding.
Yeah, you were explaining flooding, but because it leads to stonewalling.
Right.
Yeah. Which is also, that flooding being the third sign, he also sees when a partner is flooded, which he sees his fourth sign, which is what he calls body language. And so they monitored blood pressure, heart rate, of these individuals. And if during times of these discussions, their heart rate was going up, they would see sweating or perspiration, that body language alone was enough of a sign for him to say, whoa, here's one of the signs of potential divorce, is this body language when two people are interacting with each other.
And I'll tell you, this is one of the things that, we're bringing up parenting again, that I have conversations with the girls about, because Julie will say something, to Natalie, and she'll be like, Natalie, and she'll have this like whole body thing that's really negative at her. Versus, Natalie, can you? And so I've been talking to them about the difference between saying the exact same thing and tone and body language. And that's exactly, think about any time you talk with somebody and you're like, I hear what you're saying, but I feel something completely different.
Right.
Right? It's just not from an authentic place.
Totally.
Yeah.
The fifth sign are failed repair attempts. In our last video, we talked about repair attempts, where the success of a repair attempt is contingent on the strength of your friendship and your relationship.
Yeah.
And so he would know that, wow, the friendship of this particular couple is weak, and therefore any repair attempt that he would see one of them make would be failed. It wouldn't be heard, it wouldn't be received by the other. So these consistent failed repair attempts were another sign for him to predict divorce.
Right.
It's pretty straightforward.
Simple one.
Right? And then the sixth sign are bad memories, where he would ask these couples, hey, tell me about when you met. Tell me about your wedding day. And they're so overcome with negative emotions.
They can't even get to the positive.
Right, they can't get to the positive. He used an example of one couple talking where he said, oh, yeah, all the people at our wedding, they'd be clanging on their glasses trying to get us to kiss, and I was getting so annoyed. And if that's how you refer to your wedding day, then there has been so much damage that has gone on that you can't remember some of the good stuff.
And I'll say a couple things here, because I think this is a really important one. This was actually the one that we got in a little confrontation about before we started the video, because I was like, no, like I had some bad memories, but from this perspective I didn't. You and I were always able to go back and feel what it felt like to fall in love and understand what we appreciated about each other. But there was something I was going to say about that.
Well, I can go into this because a lot of the growth work I did, I was unattached to you coming back to me when we were separated, right?
You found it.
You got it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But let me finish really quick.
Yeah.
Yet, I still held on to hope because I could still remember why we fell in love in the first place. I still had respect for you. I still essentially loved you. There were all these things. I just knew that I had to grow myself in order to be the person that could attract you back to me.
And that was the piece I was going to say here. So let's take that guy, for example, that talks about all the negative things from his wedding day. Part of that could be the you phase that person hasn't worked on. There are people that are trapped in a entitlement negative loop that bring that to the marriage. And that may not necessarily have to do anything with the other party, right?
Right.
Like I've seen that in clients where it's like, okay, well, you have one person that's seeing it one way and another person that's seeing it another way. This has nothing to do with the relationship, but their, emotional intelligence and ability to see the beauty in their lives, and they're trapped in this negative side.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And then when there's not that growth work individually, then you're constantly triggering each other, getting into this loop of not growing anything.
Which sometimes I think, if I were to go back and think about how I got into this loop with you, I think that was part of my growth loop. I think I had such a perfectionist and control need from my previous programming that you couldn't ever live up to, right?
Right.
There was no pleasing.
I was like, well, fine, I'm a loser.
I'm gonna flood. Yeah, you were in flooding, so there was never any pleasing me, and it wasn't until I did that deep work on myself from my upbringing, and that's a whole other video, but that I was able to freely appreciate what was going on in our lives.
Right.
Really.
And you're talking a lot about the you element of our philosophy, which, once you even grow that, he talks about here, there's still hope. You can grow that friendship by growing you. And additionally, I read there was a piece in here that spoke to me regarding trust. And our second element is partnership. And he talks about partnership bolstering trust. So once you work on you, then you work on that partnership. You develop trust with each other, within each other, and then you can grow that friendship that he talks about. So he says it's not over till it's over. There's always things to work on. And he wants to highlight these 6 signs so that you can, look for things maybe going on in your relationship that set you up for success in working on the 7 principles.
Right.
Which our next video will be on the first principle related to just knowing your spouse. He calls them, your love maps. It's just really knowing each other, knowing, what makes each other tick.
Right, the foundation of your friendship. And I will say that, with clients that we have and have had, that when you can see somebody be able to go back and see the beauty in the falling in love experience and see the beauty in the relationship, pieces of the relationship, like that if you can see positives, there's hope, right? There's hope. And so I just want to say that if you can dig deep and find something or a lot of things that you find as gratitude points and reasons that you fell in love or things that you appreciate about each other, that right there is just there's seeds that you're gonna plant that are gonna grow later on.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.